Hello, my name is Pastor Raymond Johnson, and I've created a resource that has really been on my mind for quite some time. In this particular resource for this short video, we want to talk about some problems and solutions to help you as you go ahead and go through your grief process. I've got a very special guest, Dr. Curtis Powell. He is a grief counselor, among many other things. But he's going to be talking with us about a few things. He's going to be talking to us about how he got into grief counseling. He's also going to talk to us a little bit about his background, but we're going to focus on some problems and some solutions. And so it's going to be an open conversation that we're going to have. So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's bring him on. How you doing there, Dr. Powell?
Hey, good morning, Pastor Johnson. Thank you so much for the invitation to share this morning. It's a pleasure to be with you on this day.
Yes, so I'll thank you just for being here with us because, as you know, we have a very hard part of both of our jobs that intersects, and that is people who experience grief. It's a challenging situation for the entire family, friends, the entire network of community that people belong to. And so, as I mentioned in our opening part, I wanted to create a resource that would help people to grieve. From my perspective, and then I'll get your perspective. But from my perspective, I realize that grief is something that impacts people no matter who you are on the face of this earth, no matter what your family is like, no matter what your background is, no matter what your economic status is, it affects us all. There was a situation where I have a friend of mine who their sister had passed away, and they were looking for some sort of grief support. And I had written something years and years and years and years ago that I didn't even know was online. And when I wrote this particular document, it was talking about how to help someone who's going through grief. And they found a way to find my phone number and reach out to me. And when they did, they shared with me their experience. They shared with me that they read the article and they were so touched by it. But the crazy part is, I have absolutely no recollection of even putting that information online. And when I say a long time ago, this had to be maybe 20 years ago. That got me to realizing that there's more of a need to help people who are grieving. Additionally to that, when I first started pastoring, I had so many funerals that unfortunately I became good at doing funerals. I became an expert at connecting with people. And while those are skill sets that are needed, I hated the fact that it kept happening and that it was something that I couldn't stop from happening. And so it's with all of that in mind that I decided that what we'd do is we'd put together maybe perhaps another resource that will help people who are grieving, that will give them practical and tangible solutions and steps for their process. So thank you for coming. Maybe perhaps what you can do is tell us how you got into grief counseling.
Sure. Well, I've been in healthcare for a little almost 7 years now, working with families and patients in different critical care situations. Currently, I work at the University of Miami Hospital, where I'm the director of spiritual care. But before coming here, I worked at the Cancer Center. I also did some work in hospice care. And so you're kind of just engulfed with the family dynamics of grief and loss. So I had to kind of self-educate myself on how to be effective. I got some more training to help people in the space of grief and mourning and loss. So the last maybe 3+ years, I got some more training to really kind of fine-tune some things. And then my own losses. I've lost, my father died in 2009, a very difficult loss. And some of the things that I learned in my own healing, I now use to help others when they're going through grief as well. So I come to this process as both a student and a teacher.
Yeah, I think that's probably perhaps the best when you can bring your own experience into a situation and you can identify with the needs of a person, and then you can go ahead and help reach them. Some of the problems that I've faced and I'm interested in knowing what some of yours are. But some of the problems that I've faced when it comes to grief counseling or just helping people to grieve, yeah, and I'll just mention the main one is actually the concept and the idea that grief is a process. Maybe perhaps a confused process, but it's a process. And years, I have told people it's just a part of the process. You're going through the stages of grief. This is something to be expected. One day you're fine, the next day you're not. And I really thought that I was doing right. But ashamed to say that I was talking with you recently. I just found out that I was wrong. And so I'm really, really curious if you would maybe share with us the correct ideology on that, but then kind of maybe tell us what some of the problems are that you face as well when you're dealing with
Sure.
grief counseling.
Sure. Well, first of all, let me just affirm you for your initiative today, and as a pastor, being quote unquote good at funerals, I definitely understand that. And many faith communities, pastor, are great at providing support on the front end of death and demise, but many of us on the back end, on the length of grief, that's where some of the gaps are. In my view, there are three broad categories that kind of impact and make grief kind of problematic for us. Number one is miseducation, and you mentioned the stages of grief. And for those who don't know, the stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And some people wonder if they go through that like progressively, and I say no. You can bounce all over the place with stages of grief, and to dig a little deeper, Pastor, the stages of grief really are kind of misapplied. Their origin actually began with the doctor studying the dying process of patients, not the families. So what she studied was actually what patients were going through as they were going through the dying process. So we've kind of taken her study and attached it to the families. Not saying that there's overlap, but my own experience in the training, the Kubler-Ross grief cycle, which many of us look at, in my view, doesn't really apply to every grief situation. So miseducation is one that we can talk about. Number two, socialization, how we are kind of socialized with grief and just sorrow in general. Um, think of the gender differences. When little boys get hurt, sometimes they're told not to cry, or be tough, or be strong. Whereas if a young girl gets hurt, she's kind of coddled and hugged. Oh, it's okay. We let her cry. So even as a young children, the process of dealing with pain and being vulnerable is kind of shunted from best practices. And the last thing that I see is in our just the American culture. Like, we want to live at all cost, and I want to live too, but we have a hard time accepting death. Period. So, quick example, Pastor. I was working with an agency, hospital agency. The patient was 101, and she was dying. The family was still hoping that she would live a few more days. We as a clinician, you're kind of aware of the dying process, like physically what happened. That she was actively dying, and the daughter went to go prepare some. Even people read that those long length of ages, 100 plus, like, we want people to live at all costs. So those three things kind of come together, and then you add your context, which is being in a faith community, which is a great place, like I said, for support, usually on the front end. But when people are going through grief, we kind of want them to be happy in a few weeks, and that's not always the case.
I've had that situation where people did actually feel as if they themselves, as if their family would live forever, and they approach it like that. And even in the most striking scenario, their emotions, their heart, they still think that there's a possibility. I have one member got mad at me when I prayed and visited the family member because the family member didn't live. and it wasn't a personal attack. Well, he made it personal, but it wasn't personal. You know, you have to look at it from a different perspective. He's trying to put that grief somewhere, and he viewed me as safe, and so he went ahead and he unleashed everything he had. Right? Yeah, he unleashed it all, but um, it helped me to realize that when people grieve, they don't know how to express themselves. They don't know how to um, work through it and walk out of that dark place. In fact, one of the things they do is they refuse to talk about their pain with their family members who are also grieving. They also refuse to talk with someone who's a trusted person. They think that they can do it on their own, or they may talk with people, but they cover and they hide how they really feel. Perhaps one of the most striking scenarios is when there's someone who is very decisive and a problem solver, an organizer, and they work so hard to put the funeral together, to take care of all of the needs, to go ahead and make sure everything is right and the family is okay. And they don't have anyone to take care of them. And oftentimes, the only time that they would be available for anyone to even help them is after the funeral takes place, after the wake, if there is one, after the burial, the graveside service, when they go back home to their city and they're not even connected to myself, they're not connected to anyone local where the funeral is taking place, and they go back to their place in darkness, in sadness, and they're left to do it on their own. And that's very disheartening from for myself. But maybe you could shed some light on how we can, or how a person can be helped who's going through an experience similar to that.
Sure. Well, I think first of all, the scenario you painted, Pastor, is spot on. A method called the grief recovery method that I use in my sessions, and we start off dealing with kind of miseducation and some of the myths that we deal with when we come into the grief journey. And one of those myths are grieving alone.
Grieving alone.
Yeah, and also for and they've been told or believe they have to be strong for everybody else, and that can become very problematic if you don't have spaces to be vulnerable and to express weakness. And that's why the grief support system, especially in small groups, can be so effective because people are able to let down their shields. They can become vulnerable with people. And at the end of 8 weeks, a lot of that weight they've been carrying has been shared and lifted, because we teach people how to kind of process their grief with some simple steps to help them in the service that I provide. But the issues that you voice are very, very prominent, and unfortunately, we don't like to deal with it a lot because it's not an attractive topic, but it's a reality that we have to deal with.
Definitely, it is reality. It's something that we have to address, and I want to wrap this up and come to the end. And I would like to invite you to maybe perhaps give us um, some steps, some general principles to follow. And here's the person we're talking to. We're talking to the person who needs to remember what you're about to say because they have no idea they're about to go into an experience loss, but they need to be able to remember it. We're talking to an individual who's experiencing it and it's hot and they're having a hard time knowing which way is up. But we're also talking to the person who will come back and who will watch this video and something that they can kind of perhaps self-help to help themselves at least recognize or implement. And the last person we're talking to, and putting all these people really into one profile, is we're talking to someone who will be able to help someone who is going through this. I know that's one of my biggest problems, is when I see people who are going through something, how do I help them? And what resource do I need to give them? Where can I point them? How can I connect them? What can I tell them? How can I listen to them? How can and so we're looking at trying to help someone. That's the person who's looking for resources. So if you could kind of give us an idea of what are the general principles that need to be considered or followed when a person is experiencing grief.
Sure. Let me try to be as succinct as I can because, number one, we have to understand this, Pastor. Grief is based on relationship. So the grief journey of individuals differs based on the relationship. If someone is grieving a father that was loving and kind and present, that grief journey is different than someone that's grieving a father that was absent, emotionally distant, or verbally abusive. So, trying to provide some principles, I will share some. Just I think we have to understand from the jump that when we grieve, when we're going through this process, it's always about a relationship that is now severed. And whether that relationship was healthy or unhealthy impacts how we grieve. And sometimes if that grief becomes complicated along the journey. So I'm going to share with you four broad principles, and I'm going to use the acronym BLUE because during the Christmas season, Pastor, some people experience holiday blues. They call it the blue holiday because this could be their first Christmas or their first New Year's without that special loved one. So these are some broad principles that people can use to help themselves. So the B stands for being present. Being present. Grief sometimes attempts to keep us frozen into the final moments of someone's demise. I see this a lot in the hospital. So if someone died, say they were on in a critical care unit, and there are machines attached to the person, and that image stays in the person's mind, and that can be hard to detach from. Being present allows us of someone's lost. Number two, the L stands for listening to your heart, listening to your emotional self, not suppressing the emotions, not trying to self-medicate through destructive activities, but being able to listen to your heart and being able to put words to emotions. And that's something that we do in my small groups. We actually give people a list. It's called a feeling wheel with different emotions. People kind of name what's going on in their heart because sometimes there's so much going on, it's kind of hard to parse and tease things out to put a name on it. But listening to your heart is very important. The U is for understanding limitations. Sometimes it's good to say no. You may not go to every holiday party, every family gathering. Sometimes you need some time to be still and to be quiet and to be by yourself sometimes. Sometimes that may be helpful for you. But if you're constantly trying to appease other people and going here and going there and attending this party or going to this service, you can find yourself in a cycle where you're not taking time to process where you are. And the E, especially for during this holiday season, is for establishing new traditions or new rituals. And can be very, very powerful as people come to accept the grief, the loss of their loved one, as they move from what I call from grief to gratitude. The seasons can be a great time for establishing a way of honoring the loss, okay, putting some meaning to it. So it's not just a pain, but now we've given of a family have Christmas dinner, they have a chair that's empty. The empty chair symbolizes the loss of that loved one, just to show respect and honor. This is where grandfather would sit. He loved this chair. We want to just take a time to tell maybe 3 funny stories about grandfather, to talk about his humor or his love or something that turns that pain and gives meaning to that rundown. People really want to get help. Again, I do provide a service, and I tell folks if you don't get help from me, get help somewhere, because there are support groups available to help people process their grief and their loss that can lead them from grief to gratitude.
That's amazing. Internet is a little sketchy, so I'm not sure. I hope they were able to get that. But look, we put your contact information up, and I'm going to share it in just one moment. But I love what you said about the empty chair because that helps individuals to acknowledge. It helps them to acknowledge the, I want to say the loss, but the death. We oftentimes use words instead of death that sometimes facilitate not accepting the fact that the person has died. I've worked with a police department as a chaplain, and we used to do notifications, and so we did certification and whatnot for grief. And one of the things that we learned is you've got to help people to process. We're not talking about fabricating emotions or fabricating circumstances, but use the word death. I've had people say, we lost your loved one. What do you mean you lost them? They were just here. Well, that's grief talking. You know what I mean? And other situations. So I love the empty chair because it helps people to acknowledge what's going on, that there is a death, that grandfather is not coming back, but it also gives you the opportunity to celebrate your memories of him. You don't just move on like nothing happened. This is a major event. So I love that. I'm going to let you share any closing words that you may have, and then I'll go ahead and share your contact information again. But I'm going to share any closing words or messages that you'd like to give to us, and then we'll go ahead and share that.
Thank you. Number one, I think understanding that grief is universal. We all will experience it. We all will go through it, and there is no shame, or there should be no shame attached to being sad or sorrowful. Okay, so if you are grieving, if you're in that journey of grief, if you're having a difficult time navigating that space, that is part of the human experience. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. This is part of the human experience. Number two, death is not the only thing that we grieve. There are over 40 different types of losses that we can grieve. It's just maybe losing a job, going through a divorce, a major financial loss, sometimes even moving from one city to a new city. So exploring, something we do in my groups, we explore different types of losses so people can kind of connect the dots in their grief journey. Because some people are grieving stuff, they're not even aware they're grieving it, but they just feel pain because they haven't really dealt with it. So being able to look at grief in a larger picture than just losing a loved one, I think, is also helpful.
Our signal is from Dr. Powell. Looks like we lost a signal from him, but I want to make sure that what we do is we share his contact information once again. This has been a really, really, really good um, time that we've had. We've been able to talk about what's going on, but I'm going to bring him back on, and then we'll go ahead and let him finish his thought, his concept. We'll share his information, and we'll go ahead and transfer that. So give me 1 second. We're going to pull him back up. Go on. That you can go ahead and finish your thought, your concept.
I lost you, Pastor. Can you repeat that one more time, please?
Sure. Yes. Go ahead and finish your idea of where you were at with your closing idea, and then I want to go ahead and share your contact information again.
Yes, if I encourage people, if you're going through the grief process, if you know someone who is grieving, number one, you don't have to grieve alone. Okay, grieving alone is not recommended. There are spaces and times where you will be alone, but grief is better handled in a setting where there's confidentiality, there's trust, and you can share the weight with other people. And this, I believe, concept goes even back to biblical times when the people of God grieved corporately, like when Moses died, they all grieved together. So the small group is a space where you can grieve with other grievers and process your grief. And in my sessions, Pastor, I only allow up to 8 people. So it's small, it's locked, and it's confidential. And we work together for about 8 weeks, typically, helping people move from grief to gratitude. My information, my email, empowermints with an E, empowermints with an E and with an I, empowermints at gmail.com. My Instagram is there, grief underscore guy underscore 007, and my cell number. You can text me at 954-279-3232. We can have a conversation to see what I offer will benefit you in your grief journey. Thank you so much, Pastor, for this time to share today.
This has been good. I really appreciate it. Once again, that's Dr. Curtis Powell. It's his email is empowermints with an I at gmail.com. You can also find him on Instagram with grief underscore guy underscore 007. It's grief guy 007 underscore in between each. And you can also text him as well. His area code is 954-279-3232. Again, that's 954-279-3232. Dr. Powell, really appreciate you. Appreciate your time. I know you're a busy, busy guy, but be blessed. Thank you so very much. And everyone else, make sure that what you do is that you reach out to Dr. Powell. If you know someone that can benefit from grief counseling, grief therapy, please go ahead and reach out to him and make sure that you connect with him. I have been able to refer different members to him and different individuals I know who are not members of my church, and they have all come back with positive remarks and marked improvement. So please go ahead and take advantage of that. God bless you all. We love you much. We're praying for you. You take care, and we'll see you next time. God bless.